the new piece of sheet metal all cleaned off and clamped down and ready to weld. Used a lot of this style clamp. I bought a bunch of them a while ago and I thought, well gosh, that's probably more than I'm ever going to need, but as you can see, I actually could have used 2 or 3 more. How this style clamp works is this part here goes up through the seam. Once you get that up through the seam with the hole exposed, you put that metal rod inside the hole and you tighten down the wing nut, and it brings the 2 edges flush, completely flush, which is what you want when you're welding a butt weld like this. First started making these tacks, it looks like I had my wire speed set a little bit too low and I was blowing through somewhat. Once I got that adjusted, you can see the welds after that look a lot nicer. Do have quite a few blown through areas, but not enough to be a tragedy yet. Up here it looks like I'm dealing with a little bit of weak metal situation, possibly. A little bit of thin metal. I'm going to have to be extra careful up here. I did solve my blow-through problem over here. Ultimately, adjusted the wire feed a little bit more, a little bit down. I had it on 5. It's now set on 4. And I just released the trigger sooner, so I wasn't holding the trigger in as much, and that seems to have solved my blow-through problem for the most part over here. For whatever reason, the metal's a little bit thinner over here. I guess it just got exposed to more moisture over the years, but not having that problem up here, really. Not having it on the sides, on the bottom. Yeah, so that's it. What I got to do next is fill in the gaps between the tack welds with weld. The objective there, again, is to not warp the damn thing. Did get it stitched up all the way around, and I think I did it for the most part without warping it. I don't feel anything that's an obvious warp in it, except, where was it? Right here. Right here there's a high spot that I think I got from grinding on it a little bit before I tacked it up. But anyhow, it's not severe. I can get rid of that with a hammer and dolly. I'm not going to sweat that. As you can see, these are not pretty welds at all. I can't say I'm proud of them. But given the fact that I'm using a flux core welder and that I'm trying to do this with as little heat as possible to not warp the thing. This is the back side of the door. I just wanted to get a quick shot inside here to see how well these welds penetrated from the front side. Gosh, all in all, it's not terrible. I can see a couple of areas where it looks like maybe it didn't go 100% of the way through, but I can't get a thumbnail in there either, so it really did come pretty much all of the way through. that area there. A couple of these areas I might hit with a welder from the backside, just to say I did. But all in all, penetration's pretty good. That's one solid piece in there. What's next to do on this is to grind these down very, very carefully. With the grinding, you have to be just as careful to not put too much heat in one spot for too long, just the same as you do when you're welding. So I'm going to be using a combination of zip discs and grinding wheels and some 80 grit flap discs to get this as smooth as possible without warping it. Again, I'm going to be super careful not to put too much heat into one spot at one time. I want to avoid warping at all costs. Grind a little and then feel for heat, grind a little more, feel for heat. When I feel it start getting too hot, I stop in that area, move on to another area. I told you one of the tricks is to not put too much heat into it to avoid warping. The other trick is to only grind the weld and not grind the metal on either side of the weld. You do the best you can. You know, it's not perfect. Got the grinding done. I got the sanding done. As I was expecting, it did show me where a bunch of pinholes were. I actually had more pinholes than I expected, not along the top here, along the bottom, but along this left-hand side. You probably remember earlier in the video I pointed out that the metal seemed to be thinner on here. So I had a bunch of pinholes to address. I'm pretty sure I got them all at this point. What I did was I used this LED light underneath inside the door and just moved it from side to side, and wherever I saw light shining through, I just hit that spot really lightly with the welder and plugged up the hole. As I was stripping the paint and rust off there, I just noticed this spot where it was caved in on the bottom of the door. I'm sure from the original accident that caused all the damage on the outside of the door, so I'm just very casually hitting it with a hammer and dolly, just straightening it back out into some kind of decent shape. Stripping disc is doing a great job taking down the basic paint and getting rid of the basic rust. It's not real good at getting down into the nooks and crannies and cracks, so I've switched to an assortment of wire wheels for that. On the back side of the door, all the bits that are going to be painted are stripped down to bare metal, finally. That was a big job. That took me about 3 hours. But as you can see, I got everything down to bare metal. Just to make sure that I don't have any rust bubbles come up later, or be as sure as I can, I am going to take a fine brush, a very fine brush with some rust converter, and put a little bit of rust converter in all the little corners, cracks, crevices, nooks and crannies. Okay, so I still have a couple of bits to weld up. This is where I accidentally cut through the inner door. I showed that in an earlier clip. I'm going to weld that up, grind that smooth. As you can see, I've got a couple of pinholes here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little pinholes. I'm going to try to weld those up. If I can't weld them successfully, I'll have to come up with a patch to put here. All right, I got those cuts welded up, no problem. This metal here was not too thin to weld. I was able to weld up those pinholes without too much issue. Next step is to put the rust converter up in the crevices, and then we'll let it sit overnight. Got that rust converter applied everywhere it needs to be applied. Got it in all those crevices, nooks, and crannies, anywhere I couldn't be 100% certain that I got all the rust. I let that rust conversion fluid sort of cure overnight, dried really good. Mainly I want that for all the nooks, crannies, and crevices. I don't really want it on the flat areas of the metal, the sheet metal, because the self-etching primer needs to adhere to that directly. So I'm going to go ahead, kiss it really lightly with an 80 grit flat disc just to get that off of there, and then I'm going to go ahead, clean it, and spray primer on it. Here's a quick shot inside the door. I'm not really going to be able to film in here while I'm doing this, but I wanted to at least explain to you what I'm going to do. Inside the door, I'm going to kiss these welds very lightly with a Dremel with an 80 grit flat disc on it. The reason for that is that I'm going to put seam sealer over them. So we'll clean up the welds. I'll shoot a little primer on there, actually put it on with a utility brush probably, just to put a little bit on there, let that dry. And once that dries, I'm going to go back over this with some seam sealer. I'm not trying to grind them down, but I just want to get rid of the sharp edges. As I put that seam sealer on here, it's going to be much easier to apply it once I get rid of, for example, this little piece here sticking up. Okay, I got those welds dressed up. Got the area around the weld cleaned up as best I can with a wire wheel on a Dremel. And now I got some primer in a cup and a small utility brush. I'm going to go ahead and brush this on the seams. All right, I got that whole seam covered with primer. Everywhere that was bare metal is now covered in primer. Okay, it's about 15 minutes after the clip you just saw. You can see it's about 67 degrees in my garage here today. I've had the heat on. My first quick coat of self-etching primer has tacked up, and we're ready for a second coat. And I think that second coat will probably be the final coat of primer for today, and then I'm going to leave it. I got to go out of town, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Probably finish it up when we get back. I'm not being as meticulous about keeping particulates out of the paint, as this is the backside and underside of the door. It's not really going to be visible except for this part here, which will be in the interior of the car. So I'm paying a little more attention to that. I couldn't find my tack cloths. I know I've got a whole package of tack cloths around here somewhere. Obviously, once we get to the front side of the door, the side that's going to be visible to everyone, I'm going to be much more meticulous about keeping that clean. Coat number 2. So that's 1 coat of self-etching primer, 2 coats of primer sealer. I'm going to let it sit like this for about a week in front of that heater there. I got to go out of town for about a week. So when I come back, we'll be ready to do some body filler. Get rid of whatever little high spots and low spots remain. I know there's a few in there. We'll probably use a guide coat at some point as well to point them out. But man, this is looking so much better than what I started out with. I'm really, really pleased with where I'm at so far. Just a reminder, this is what we started with. That's what we've got right now, and we're far from finished. We're definitely going to make some improvements with the filler and quite a bit of sanding. We'll get that all smoothed right out.